Today, Scott is joined by Professor Armand D'Angour, an Oxford classicist and Fellow of Jesus College. Armand's work spans ancient Greek music, lyric poetry, and the cultural imagination of the classical world. He's the author of The Greeks and the New, Socrates in Love, How to Innovate, An Ancient Guide to Creative Thinking, and How to Talk About Love, Plato's Symposium. Enjoy!
Thanks so much for coming on to the show.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
My first question is about your career highlights, I should say. You've racked up something of a dizzying array of accomplishments. I've been through them myself, but it's always interesting to hear people walk through the cliff notes in their own words. Start wherever you want, where you're from.
Well, it's a bit more of a non-career than a career. So I had a fantastic schooling. I was taught Latin when I was 6 and Greek when I was 8. And at the same time at home, I was being taught the piano from about the age of 4, and then picked up the cello from the age of 10. So I was a musician, and I was into
a Latin-speaking musician.
Into Latin and Greek at a very young age, which isn't necessarily an advantage for a future career, but it was something that I fell in love with in both cases. And then got a scholarship to Eton from prep school, and was a scholar at Eton and was studying music as well there, amongst other things, and got a scholarship from there to Oxford, which I delayed for 3 years in order to do a performance course at the Royal College of Music to get a degree for that. But I studied both piano and cello for 3 years, 1976 to 9. So I was always doing two things, music and the classics, neither of which are necessarily the path to, wealth and fame. I ended up doing neither, because after I'd come out of my degree, my 4-year degree in Oxford, being that much older, having had a 3-year degree in music, my father's business, which is manufacturing and selling tin boxes, decorative tins around the world, was going through a bad patch. This was the early 90s. And he had a nervous breakdown, effectively. And my brother and I went in to try and help his business, not being business people, in our 20s, thinking we could probably do anything. And we're then involved in a maelstrom of business life for several years, during which we moved the manufacturing base of my father's business from England to Hong Kong, which in those days was beginning to be a manufacturing center. Set up a factory in Shenzhen, in mainland China, before Shenzhen was anything but paddy fields with occasional buildings. Actually, that would have been in 1989. So I left Oxford in 1983 and was doing the cello, and then got sucked into business.
89, quite a fortuitous year.
Yeah, so
eventful year,
very eventful. And then so then for a few years, 89 to about 93, 94, I was effectively running the tin business. It involved a lot of traveling to China, to the newly set up factory, and to lots of our customers around the world. And
like for cookie boxes.
Yeah, exactly. For tin.
What's industrial tin used for, though? Like, what would a lot of tin be outside of like decorative?
No,
or it's mostly decorative.
It's not. I mean, so tin boxes are made of sheet steel, which are covered with a thin electrolytic plating of tin, just so that you can print on them. You make pretty patterns.
Yeah,
and then you create molds. And we had about 100 different shapes, and cake tins or coffee tins or tea tins.
Yeah.
And you could then print on those either, Twining's tea, so they're kind of promotional tins, or what we tend to do, what we specialized in, was creating very pretty patterns so that anybody could buy any small amount,
right,
and they could put their own label on it.
Oh, great.
So
the white label.
Yeah. So the idea was that if you want to be a tin company, if you want to be a tea company, you need 50,000 tins. That's fine. We can produce those for you. But to produce 50,000 tins economically, you have to print certain numbers of sheets of steel and mold these things, and so that each tin might be 50 pence. If you say, oh, I'm a small tea company, I want 500 tins with my name on it, well, each tin would cost £50 on that basis. You can't do it. So what you do instead is you say, well, have you got a stock of things that are basically this shape,
right?
And I can put my own label on it, and that's how we did it. So that's what we sold to that group. Anyway, so I did all that, designing and manufacturing and all the problems for a few years.
Okay.
And eventually...
it's kind of fun. You ping pong between Asia and the UK and probably other places.
And then met my wife-to-be, and she was about to embark on a PhD, and I felt immensely jealous of this, having left Oxford with my bachelor's and never had a chance really to go back to thinking about the classics.
As you were pulled into the thing.
Yeah, it's first being a cellist and then a manufacturing tin seller. And she said, well, why don't you do it? I was very supportive. I mean, she saved my life in that respect. I could have been selling tins for the rest of my life. What I did was then I applied to do a PhD in London, where I live, and I did that from 1994 to 98. In 1998, I was 40 years of age. I then applied for postdocs, or JRFs, what you do after you get a doctorate. And, of course, I was too old. So those are the days when ageism ruled. In 1998, it didn't matter how many doctorates I applied for. I wasn't even going to get an interview.
Right.
But by an extraordinary stroke of luck, one of the professors at UCL, where I did my PhD, had got to know me a bit and had then become herself
Where you did your undergrad, you mean?
Yeah. No, not undergraduate. This is where I did my PhD. I've done my undergraduate at Merton, Oxford.
Right, but then how did you get to know her a bit?
Oh, I see, because when I was doing my PhD, she was at UCL.
Wait, but sorry, I'm just to understand. You're working for the tin business. Your wife-to-be is working on a PhD. You also want to do a PhD, but they don't want you because you're too old.
No. I did the PhD.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay, so
I've gone beyond that. I would say after that, you want to apply for a postdoc.
A postdoc. Okay, but
JRF.
they're doing ageism in the postdocs.
That's what I was talking about. Yes.
Right.
So the PhD wasn't difficult to get onto, even though I was older. And it was for me, I loved it.
What do they care? I mean, if you're doing the postdoc.
Yeah. But, for postdocs at the time,
What year was this?
This was 1998.
Was this still, when did this whole regime of, you can't just do a PhD and become a professor, you have to do postdocs and the visiting assistant.
It was already there,
right,
to some degree. Not to the same degree as it is now, but a sense that what do you do after you have got your PhD?
Well, in theory, you should be a professor, but there's no jobs. It seems like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of filtration at every level.
Yes. Well, it wasn't clear that it was possible just to get a job. Not that there were many jobs around.
No. I'm saying I don't think that's how it works now. You certainly can't.
Certainly doesn't now. But at the time, I thought, well, I've done this doctorate. I need to enhance it with a few more years of study. And so I was applying for those postdocs, but it really was ageism. I mean, a 40-year-old applying for a postdoc, it didn't wash.
I'd hire you.
Anyway, so I was beginning to lose faith in the possibility of an academic career, but Chris Krauss is her name, who went on to become a professor at Yale, was the then tutor at Oriel, Oxford, and she had gone there from UCL, where I had known her when I was doing my PhD. Not terribly well, but well enough for her to rate me. And she kind of emailed me out of the blue and said, I'm going on maternity leave. Do you want to do my job?
Which was what?
Which was to be a full Oxford tutor.
Yeah.
For a year. And I said, sure. I was delighted to be given that opportunity. I mean, it was appallingly paid, because Oxford does, in those days, you basically totted up the hours you worked and you submitted that.
Is it much different now?
It's slightly different if you have it's not that different, but put it this way, that year I totted up £6,000 worth of teaching.
Right.
That was a full tutorial job.
For a year.
And I made £6,000 doing that. But the fact is, it got me back into Oxford. It got me back into a world which had known me 12, 13 years earlier.
Yeah.
And many of the same people, many of my dear old tutors, like the great Peter Parsons, who was a Regis professor, like Oliver Lyne, Oliver Taplin, my ancient history tutor, man who examined me, who examined my finals, was Robin Lane Fox. He's still around, but he was then. And it's like when I turned up again after 12 years, they said, "Oh, gosh, are you again?" So it wasn't as if I was an unknown quantity in Oxford. And after that, I wasn't getting anywhere getting postdocs. But then, amazingly, this job came up at Jesus. And it was a 5-year full fellowship, which meant I had to leave the job after 5 years. I mean, one of those things which doesn't exist anymore because it's illegal. If you've done 4 years, you have to have a full-time job. But at the time, it was like a fixed...
What is that? What is that?
Well, now, the law is in England that if you are permanently employed for more than a certain period of time, and I think it's 4 years, then you have to have full employment rights.
Which is what, like healthcare, or you already have healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but
Just
I think it also means you can't just be told you've got to go. So, I think you can do that with a 2-year post or something now. But the idea that you can do it for the 5-year post, I think, is no...
Why not? It's a free market. I mean...
No, it's not. No. In the UK, I think if it's over 4 years, they say you're effectively giving this guy a full-time job. And actually, that makes sense because I knew people who'd done 2 5-year fixed-term posts from the age of, say, 25 to 35. And at 35, they were unemployed, having basically taught at Oxford for 10 years.
Right.
I mean, that has happened, or that happened at the time.
So you got this 5-year post at Jesus?
Which I thought it was obvious that was, once I was in post, I was going to extend it into a full fellowship. It wasn't, as it turned out, that easy. They had to re-advertise the thing. I had to apply for 2 other jobs I knew I wasn't going to get before I reapplied for the job at Jesus. That job needn't have come my way. I could have been 45 and out of a job. But as it happened, when they did re-advertise it and I stood for it, I was lucky enough to get it in 2004, so it was a year earlier. And they then backdated my fellowship. So I have basically been a professor at Jesus since 2000. And now for, 25 years. Hard to believe. Feels like yesterday. But anyway, I fell on my feet, or Jesus saves, as we say. Jesus saved. And
teaching classics, philology, music, or a bit of everything.
No, I mean, it's the full professorial job at an Oxford college for classics. Which
means what? You have to do the undergrads, grads,
grads, exactly, yes, and whatever.
And whatever administrative.
A lot of administrative stuff to do with the governing body. So a fellow is basically the board member.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been doing now for 25 years, and very happy to be in that position, to be able to do it. And it was it's an amazing thing to get a job when you're, I was around 42. That is almost impossible to get now, having come out of a top university and got a top results, and yet when you apply for something like an Oxford Fellowship, there might be 100 applicants, all of whom are fantastically well qualified. So I've sat on many job panels since, and you look at the one application after another, people who've written articles and books and all sorts of things.
All the things.
And they won't get the job. In the end, the shortlist from 100, you whittle it down to 6. You then interview them all. In my experience, one usually does come out as the front runner. But sometimes, you can have bitter disputes as to who is to get the job.
It's almost a kind of, I wouldn't say fool's errand, but the deck is stacked against you.
Oh, it's so stacked against you. It's hard to advise anyone
to go
into the academic world in at the moment, and to think you're going to get a job in Oxford or Cambridge. Well, forget it. It's going to be very hard unless you're totally brilliant, and I think to some degree.
But as you just said, everyone on the list.
So many of them are.
Yeah.
So many have written so much and done so much. I think
it's not that different. Undergrad in the U.S., the credentialing starts earlier. Of course, most people who go to, I went to Princeton, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, whatever, Stanford, the extended list, do not end up doing PhDs. But the selection there is, when I applied to Princeton, it was 6%. It's probably now down, if I had to guess, to like 3%, maybe even 2%. The number of applicants every year goes up for the same amount of seats. And sometimes they raise the number of seats a little bit, but it's not a meritocracy, I would say. It's a bit of luck. It's a bit of meritocracy. I mean, there's a minimum threshold of grades and test scores and things.
But then there's a huge amount of luck involved.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I wonder, this is such a huge commitment to do a PhD, a postdoc, maybe a lectureship afterwards.
Yeah.
What the appeal is for people, I mean, I think you have to be really committed to answering a question or love of the subject or something. I've met both kinds in Oxford. I've met people who are very rah-rah, and I've met a number of like lukewarm, tepid types who are just like, well, I didn't, I went through undergrad, I did a master's and I did a PhD, and like, now what?
That's right. You can't necessarily expect a student to know what they want to do with their knowledge of any particular subject. So I was entranced by everything in the classics, the languages, the literature, the history, the philosophy, all of those things which I'd studied up to a point. I just wanted to do more and more and more. I wanted to spend my life doing it in some way if I possibly could. And after 10 years in music and in business, where I barely had time to read a book, it was a desperate thirst to return to a lifestyle where I could, obviously continue with my musical interests. I still play the cello. I have a piano trio in which I play regularly and we give concerts. Great. But I wanted to be able to immerse myself in the classical world again. And that's one of the reasons I chose as the subject for my doctorate, something that was very broad. I chose the idea of newness and innovation in ancient Greece, because I thought, let's have a chance to read around all sorts of areas which I had never specialized in, such as ancient medicine or ancient religion. Ancient music was one which, nobody specialized in at the time, but I wanted to know what it felt like at the time to come up with all these innovations. And so it was a deliberately broad area. In fact, someone ticked me off. I remember, that's not the subject for a doctorate. You've got to do something much more precise and
sounds like conversations I've been having.
Yeah, but I said, well, that's what I want to do. I then went to UCL, and that was in 1994, where the Professor of Greek had just come, and that was Richard Yanko, brilliant Hellenist. And, being an ambitious man, he wasn't going to say, oh, that's too big. He just rightly said, oh, you need to cut it down to a 50-year period. And, of course, that was absolutely right. So I did, I looked at innovation from 430 to 380 BC, which is essentially was demonstrated by the comic poet Aristophanes. So his oeuvre falls roughly in those 50 years. And, of course, ancient comedy, tells you a lot about ancient society. So in the end, I wrote this thesis on the dynamics of innovation in the Athens of Aristophanes. That's what it was called. And I looked at areas such as law and religion and music and other things, even things like sport, whatever one could see as being innovative in the time. There was a big emphasis on the time on intellectual innovation, cultural innovation. Of course, there was artistic innovation as well. They produced the Parthenon. They produced new kinds of artistic. We have evidence a lot for new kinds of representational art. Anyway, so it gave me a chance to do exactly what I had intended to do, which is to range widely around the world of the classics and see what I was interested in. But so that wasn't saying, oh, I've got to do this because I've got this problem to solve or something of that kind. But by the time I'd done it, there were things I knew that I was in a position to think about that were unsolved problems in the classics. And one thing I do love more than anything is to solve problems. So during my doctorate, I had come across this rather obscure testimony to a genre called the dithyramb, which was an ancient dance. And it was danced in classical times by 50 men or 50 boys arrayed in a wide circle. But the beginning of an ode by Pindar, who was a great poet of the period and who wrote dithyrambs, tells us in the old days it was different. But there were holes in the papyrus. And this had been found in 1919, and it said in the old days it was different, and then there was some strange comment about the sound of S and the arrangement of the dithyramb. And I just had an immediate insight into what he was telling us, which was that the dithyramb originally was danced in a long line, but because a line you cannot coordinate the singers, the S came out as a hiss, because actually the testimony did talk about it being like a snake. And what happened was it was then created into a big round circle with the conductor in the center to coordinate the singers' voices. And I happened, I'd been conducting and so on, so I knew that coordinating S's is actually very important in a choir. You don't want it to straggle when they go, say, Hosanna in excelsis. You don't want to hear everyone go, so you go, see, and you cut it off. So without, almost a priori, I thought, I know what this is about. But, one had to solve the question of what the words were in the hole in the papyrus, and we knew the meter, so we had some ideas. You had to work out what the sense of it was. You had to look at all the testimonial, that's the evidence for what had happened. And there was evidence that there was a choir director called Lasos in the late 6th century who hated the sound of the S because it clashed with the sound of the double pipes. And so initially he composed dithyrambs which didn't have S in them. And clearly you can't do that forever. And so eventually what he did is he reformed this genre into a circle, which is what it became in classical. Anyway, so I wrote an article, 1997, how the dithyramb got its shape. A bit like a Just So story. And the central point of it was that I restored the papyrus that had been sitting there since 1919 with various restorations proposed, none of which actually fitted the whole. And there was a reason for that. It was because they got the grammar wrong. They tried to end the sentence in the middle of a whole, which just lengthened the beginning of the next one. What I realized is there was a sentence that continued all the way through, and it produced a perfect sense, and it told us how the dithyramb got its shape. And it was thanks to, the straggling S being coordinated by making this thing a big circle with the conductor in the center. And one of the words that hadn't been seen, interestingly, part of it had been, but no one had worked out what that word was the word for a center of a circle. So the word in Greek is omphalos, which means a navel, the boss of a shield. And the word, you saw tiny flecks of fragmentary writing on the papyrus. I came up to the Ashmolean to look at it, and you just saw the mphal bit. But as soon as you saw mphal, you realized that word had to be something to do with omphalos. And amazingly, scholars had seen those letters, but they hadn't actually put it two and two together and realized that's what the word needed to be. So I felt I was onto something. I published that before I had finished my doctorate, and that became, quite an important article for the subsequent study of this genre. And when I came for the job, the people the classicists on the panel had read that and were impressed by it. And I think that made a difference to me getting the 5-year position, because even though it was only a 5-year position, it was still quite heavily competed for. I was certainly not the front runner for it.
This was your great discovery.
Yes.
But might I ask,
Sorry.
what might be the broader significance of this, or of this discovery?
Oh, that particular one?
Yeah.
So, okay, that was the first of many, but the broader significance is it tells us something about music and dance. It tells us something about, even about the reconstruction of an ancient text. and the kind of things that goes into textual criticism.
Right.
It kind of brought the real world into a question of academic interest, and that's what I liked about it, because I was a musician and understood the musical implications. Okay. I could bring that to bear on what this text actually told us.
Right.
And Pindar, who wrote it, was himself a great singer-songwriter, you might say. He wrote great victory odes which would have been performed for victors in the Olympic and other games. And this was the opening of one of his pieces, and it was telling us something about the history of this genre. And subsequently, the genre of Dithyram has, there have been all sorts of books about it and that sort of thing. But I think that was a very important marker to bring that into the academic sphere. Broader significance, well, maybe not that broad.
No, but
it's within the subject. It's it eventually also led me to think about music more generally in the ancient Greek world, which I had kind of written off because it seemed to me that there wasn't enough evidence for it. But of course, that's incorrect. And when I really started working on it, which was in the early 2000s, more and more it seemed to me that there was enough evidence to produce the sounds of ancient music, which had not really been done. Some people had sort of half-heartedly done it, or done it in a way that wasn't entirely scholarly. But actually, in the course of the 2000s, new instruments were being found by archaeological excavations, particular double pipes, and these could then be reconstructed, and they were being played. And this all came together in a project which I did from about 2012, which was to rediscover the sound of ancient music. We put a YouTube video up in 2017. It's had a 1.1 million views. It's only 20 minutes, and it's about 1,000 views a week. People are really interested because what it does, it lays out the history of how we know how ancient Greek music sounded. Here are the instruments. Here are the...
and you can recreate the sounds.
Yeah, and on it. And I got a choir and people who played the double pipes and explained it. It's a 20-minute video, and at the end, we performed two pieces, which is as close, I think, as you can get. Well, it was certainly in 2017, to what those pieces would have sounded like in their time. One of which is from 408 BC. It's a piece of Euripides from a chorus of his, and another was from 127 BC. It was a hymn to Apollo. And so those were sung in this concert, which was filmed and put on this YouTube video. So, and that has in itself spawned a huge interest in ancient Greek music, and quite a few of my current doctoral students are actually trying to push that forward.
Okay. This is fascinating. Can you create just on the computer, like the double pipe, like
you can, and in fact,
GarageBand?
No. Well, you can. I mean, you won't get the exact sound. I mean,
no, but you won't get the exact sound if you listen to anything on the computer.
No, that's right. So there is actually a site on the web which gives you all the fragments with a computerized reproduction of what the melodies sounded like. But it sounds so unmusical that I think that's kind of off-putting as well.
Yeah.
What I want to do again was to bring the real world into this. This is, what did music sound like? Why were the Greeks so excited by music? Which they were. They thought it was magical. They thought it was mesmerizing. They thought it could enchant animals and birds. You think of the story of Orpheus. They had love-hate feelings towards the double pipes, which are these two pipes which you play together. Sounds like two oboes played in unison, or in fact each playing different tunes at the same time, but one player is playing both. And that was a terribly important instrument. It accompanied the choruses in tragedies and comedy, for example. And then there was the lyre with its beautiful soft strings, which could enchant people, women, birds, men, whatever. And we can play them, and we can play them in the modes, that is the kind of scales with the tunings that we are told they were played in ancient times. And so we can actually hear the kind of sounds that might have been produced by ancient musicians, the kind of thing that the ancient Greeks would have loved to hear. So why don't we do that? This is what I was thinking, instead of just talking about it and producing kind of computerized sounds of the fragments of melody. And I think, we have a way to go. We still have to try and be more accurate about the fact that they didn't use tempered tuning, for example. The equal tempered tuning, which really only comes in the 18th century, Bach's well-tempered clavier and so on. But in earlier times, you had, pure tuning, and that sounds slightly different. So let's recreate that. Let's recreate the timbre of the voices that we are told that ancient singers had. They didn't have these lovely soft choral voices that we have. They had much more penetrating sort of vocal expression than we're used to nowadays. So we can keep going to try and work on what ancient music sounded like, but we made a start.
Okay. I mean, I want to shift gears a little bit. There's a lot I want to talk about, where, as with any good conversation, we won't be able to get through everything. We mentioned before the interview, we were just briefly discussing your interest in AI and the Institute for Ethics in AI here. So I'm just curious. Are you bringing like classical political thought to AI ethics, or what is your interest?
Well,
or just a separate intellectual interest?
It is more. It is not specifically about ancient thought.
Commercial ethics for AI or something, or what?
No. So I was involved in a conversation in which we were asked about how ancient thought might, in some ways, be. I'm going to have to
illuminating.
Reframe this. So, a friend from Princeton, from Stanford, Josh Ober, came over. Have you heard of Josiah Ober, professor of ancient thought? Written some brilliant work on it. And he gave a lecture on Aristotle and slavery, suggesting that actually we need to think of AI rather as Aristotle thought about slaves. So Aristotle's views on slaves was surprisingly unenlightened. It was that they were living tools, that's what he called them. So they weren't quite human, but he knew they had human attributes because slaves were, of course, human beings. But he somehow believed that there was such thing as natural slavery. And this is a bit difficult. So what Josh Ober was suggesting was that we got to be careful not to put AI in a similar category, and that maybe we need to ask ourselves, what is it that makes for genuine human interactions? And so I was called in as a discussant, and I was suggesting that the slavery is not necessarily the best example of how we might think of AI, because slaves, frankly, were humans. They were human beings. So Aristotle got that wrong. And so what I was suggesting was that we might think of things such as ancient gods, to whom were attributed all kinds of feelings and thoughts and actions. And the ancients assumed there were other things that can do the kind of things human beings can do. But they do them in a different way, or they're immortal in the case of the gods, and so on. So that was one suggestion I was making. I was kind of critiquing this idea of slavery as being a good way of thinking of AI. Another was that, of course, we endow transitional objects of various kinds, toys or statues. We endow these with thought. We often imagine that they have some quality that they perhaps don't have, and then they can exert a very powerful influence on the way we act. Even if they don't have those abilities or characteristics that we impose on them. So I was just talking around the idea of how are we to think of this thing that we are becoming dependent on, that we are asking advice from, that we feel has an awful lot of knowledge. How are we best to think of it? So that was what it was about, really. It wasn't anything as broad as taking virtue ethics and saying, let's ask what AI makes of that. So I think that probably is an interesting and important question.
There's only one person here, I think, working on that. I can send you his stuff afterwards if you're interested.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting.
He's cross-appointed in politics and law. But the only one, I think, applying it is something I'd be interested in doing.
Right.
And I've had conversations with some professors about it.
Yes.
There's quite a lot. There's quite a lot that can be applied to contemporary discussions about AI ethics, AI regulation.
I'm slightly suspicious of dabbling in AI without really understanding.
But what does this mean, dabbling in AI? Like, understanding what?
Understanding what the kind of coding that has gone into creating these programs is doing. So, as far as I understand it, AI is simply a human, very, very complex set of human codes that trawl existing knowledge, so large language models, and then use that to respond in a way that's very cleverly organized so that it sounds like they're human, but of course they're not.
That's, I think, the thing. It's not human. It doesn't, I mean, this is a whole there's a whole literature on this about what is thinking, but it's not thinking in the same way necessarily that a human would think. There's this huge literature and philosophy of mind just getting applied to this. But I want to just come back to on the slavery point. One thing I was talking about with a friend in New York recently was that it's not. You could be talking with Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, and use profanity, be verbally abusive, whatever. And on the one hand, you might say, okay, well, this is ethically justifiable because this is not a human, this is a machine, right? On the other hand, I think that actually people should not do that because of what it does to the individual. I think by engaging in that kind of verbal abuse, even to a machine, you degrade yourself in a way. And it's not to confer humanhood upon an algorithm. It's to protect yourself from being degraded as such. Does that make sense?
It does, certainly. It certainly makes sense. And what you're then doing is you're distinguishing, what makes a human, as it were, the soul of the human being, from this thing that just does what it does for algorithmic reasons. And what matters, you're saying, is a human response, which
is a kind of Stoic idea. In a way, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's about valuing what is human about us. So that's the difficulty of this AI thing. It may sound and appear to be extraordinarily empathetic and human and so on, but we know it doesn't feel, whereas we do feel. And that's...
You do it. Actually, there's people who don't. There's people. Sociopaths or people you can get hit, they bruise, they don't feel.
All right, but what I mean is, in principle, I think human beings are always going to be capable of feeling, and machines are not. I don't yet see how we can apply the thought of feeling to machines, even if they say, "Oh, I'm dying of, I'm so lonely without you," or whatever. That's not actually what they're feeling. It's what they're able to say. Now, it's possible, isn't it, that if you get into computing that uses organic materials and things like C cells or, nerve endings, maybe machines using those components will be able to feel. I mean, they literally be able to feel pain after all. Then why shouldn't they be able to feel emotions as well?
I have to talk about this with the AI regulator guy coming on. I mean, I think it was Kant, right? Maybe who he wrote the was talking about animal the ethical treatment of animals.
Yeah, yes.
I haven't read that. I have to admit.
Okay.
But I think, like I'm thinking about humans, and how they treat animals.
Right.
We inflict pain upon animals, which are feeling beings.
Yes. That's right. And you could say the same as you did about not abusing AI. You could say it's the effect on us that matters. You might not. You might say, oh, you kill a bird.
But there's lots of arguments for eating meat, and there's lots of arguments,
But let's say you kill a bird to eat the bird, and you don't care so much about the bird's feelings, but you might say, well, you become a killer in doing that. By being a meat eater, you're prepared to accept...
the bird is also a killer. The bird killed,
Well, of course. And of course,
so where does it... I mean, it's interesting. This is not my area, or maybe yours. Animal.
No, it's not animal rights. Yeah, this is Peter Singer, isn't it?
Yeah.
The philosopher of animal rights.
But anyway, so I want to be respectful of your time. There's a couple more things I want to get through here. There's this phrase which is often trotted out, particularly in recent times: "Sic transit gloria mundi." So passes the how would it even translate? So passes the heavenly world.
No, the glory of the world.
So passes the
Gloria mundi. The glory of the world.
In
this way.
So I got this idea from your Succession article. I also in a previous life wrote an article about succession. My question is about what to do after you've been in the spotlight. I think about you think about like a prime minister. Perhaps they have lots of prospects. Perhaps after they've been prime minister, but if it's a fixed term, what do you do after? You have a child actor who's famous. And then, I was just reading the other day about one of the Twilight actors who he was famous, who's, extremely well known on, posters in every teenage girl's bedroom. And then this guy, now he's like 30 something years old and he's like faded kind of to oblivion. There's a quote from a film called Babylon. It's a Damien Chazelle movie, which I quite like. It's a bit lengthy, but I'm gonna read it in full nonetheless. And then I just want to discuss this with you. Like, you're a CEO. As I read, like the average lifespan of a CEO is 7 years in the U.S. You serve as a CEO for 7 years, and then you have your time under the sun. You have your and then what's difficult is for people to figure out what to do afterwards. I think Britain is at this stage now, Britain obviously being a nation, not an individual. I think the heyday of the British Empire was really the 19th century. Post 1945, Britain has the soft power, I should say, of Britain has sort of just been on a perpetual decline. And there's some people disagree with that.
I think it has, yeah.
But Britain has not been able to successfully reinvent itself. And I think a lot of people, particularly around Oxford, are pretending as if they still live in the 19th century. And it leads to a lot of sulking, in the same way that a child actor doesn't know what to do once they're, famous. So I'll read this quote from Babylon, which, for context, there's an actor. He's a famous actor and played by Brad Pitt, named Jack Conrad. And he's famous when it's the age of the silent films. And then the age of the talking films comes and he fades to oblivion. People hear his voice for the first time and everybody laughs and in theaters and he's taking a job. And
right.
And you can be king of Hollywood, and now he's, being laughed at, and this is very difficult for him to deal with. And he goes and he asks the journalist, why did you write that nasty column about me? And this is what she says. You want to know why they laughed? Would you like me to tell you? There is no why. It wasn't your voice. It wasn't a conspiracy. And it certainly wasn't anything that I wrote. There's nothing you could have done differently. There's nothing you can do. Your time has run out. There is no why. Stop questioning it. It's over. It's been over for a while. I'm sorry. Have you ever stopped to think why, when there's a house fire, did people die and the cockroaches all survive? What happened was that you thought the house needed you. It doesn't. Doesn't need you any more than it needs the roaches. And the roaches, knowing this, crawl back into the dark, lay low, and make it through. See, but you held the spotlight. It's those of us in the dark, the ones who just watch, who survive. And there'll be hundreds more like it, too. An earthquake could wipe this town off the map, and it wouldn't make a difference. It's the idea that sticks. There'll be 100 more Jack Conrads, 100 more me's, 100 more conversations just like this one, over and over and over again until God knows when. Because it's bigger than you, you know. I know it hurts. No one asks to be left behind. But in 100 years, when you and I are both long gone, anytime someone threads a frame of yours through a sprocket, you will be alive again. You see what that means? One day, every person on every film shot this year will be dead. And one day, all those films will be pulled from the vaults, and all their ghosts will dine together and adventure together, go to the jungle, to war together. A child born in 50 years will stumble across your image flickering on a screen and feel he knows you, like a friend. Though you breathed your last breath before he breathed his first. You've been given a gift. Be grateful. Your time today is through, but you'll spend eternity with angels and ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the question here is, sic transit Gloria Mundi. How does a nation or an individual carry on after their time under the sun?
Well, I mean, I think we can look at historical examples and see that, we tend to say the Roman Empire, that was the heyday of Rome, or Alexander's empire quickly declined into the successors, coming back to succession, and the successors were in turn taken over by the Rome. So we can ask, well, what matters? Is it this conception of a thing which we call a country or a nation or an empire or a people, or is it the people themselves who are part of that? The Greeks, the Romans, the people all over Egypt and those in the Middle East and Asia who were part of those empires. I mean, they didn't go away. Yes, millions of them died, millions of them suffered. That's the terrible thing, isn't it? If it's up to me, does it matter whether I'm part of this empire or that, I'm of this nation or that, or whether I'm, dying in some horrible condition as a prisoner of someone else, or having a perfectly decent life? I mean, here I am in Britain at the moment. Britain may be declining. I would feel sorry if that's the case because of my affiliation to this country. And I would like to say, well, there are ways in which we could and should do better. But in the end, my life is very finite. I might have another 20 years if I'm lucky. And other people matter. Their lives matter to them. So I don't know. I mean, these big existential questions are very difficult to answer. I mean, that's a quote that you've just read out. Those little cockroaches, their lives matter to them. They don't care about the burning building. So, I mean, it's a big question. Where are we going with all this? I mean, you could say the same about the classics, my subject, which used to be the dominant subject. Everybody read some Greek and Latin. They all, educated people, understood when you said certain things which related to ancient texts. Now it's hardly the case, if at all.
Maybe that's the way to turn turn around Western civilization, mandate classics.
Bring the classics back. Yes. Well, I actually think there are a lot.
I'm not kidding. A
lot to be said for bringing certainly Latin back into schools. But you see, it was so badly taught, and people just thought it was about drilling verbs and so on. And some of them had absolutely no aptitude for it. You can understand that when, though that generation grew up and became education secretaries and whatever, they said, why do we need Latin? So let's get it right. Let's teach it well. Let's show what its wonder is. Let's show what its glory is. And let's show that the classics can actually help you come to terms with some of these existential questions.
Okay, well, we're beginning this. Talk to me about the active method. I mean, perhaps we could do this in Latin.
Salve
Magus.
Si Latine loquimur, non omnes intellegunt. If we speak Latin, not everyone understands. Itaque Anglicae loquamur, so let us speak English. Now, I mean, I can maybe spin off a few words in Latin and Greek. We can have a conversation with my students.
No, I don't think I could.
Well, I give tutorials with students in which we speak only Latin or only Greek, ancient Greek.
Right.
And we do that because we're studying texts in Latin and Greek, and it gives an additional confidence and additional sense of being part of what you're studying if you do it in that language. So I was never brought up to speak Latin and Greek. I learned them for years.
Anybody now? I've heard of small towns, and I've had friends who've gone to little sects and things to do it. But
there are small institutes which basically speak Latin and Greek as well.
But are there any villages?
There are no actual places which do it naturally. No.
I thought there was some place in Switzerland
where they still speak Latin.
Yeah, someone.
I haven't heard of that. I really haven't. That would be amazing. No, I know that the philosopher Montaigne was brought up speaking Latin as his first language.
Really?
Yes, because his parents set him a tutor.
I like Montaigne. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a native Latin speaker before.
Maybe I have to. Maybe I have to ensure that my kid speaks Latin.
For things. But no, I don't think you need to go that far. But I think the idea that this is a language which was alive and still could be alive is a good one. And so when we introduced the project into...
It's alive like the ghosts, it's alive.
Yeah, but we introduced the project into Jesus College, which is, where I teach, back in 2020, just after COVID, really. And, for the last 5 years, we've had students who come out actually being able to converse in the language. And when they look at a Latin or Greek text, it's something that
comes alive.
Feels more alive to them. I mean, in fact, I'm a huge proponent of the idea that we should learn what these languages sounded like. I'm just as I want to learn what the music sounded like. There's enough evidence for how they sounded at different periods. So people say, well, how do you know what the pronunciation was? Well, sometimes it was pronounced like this, sometimes it was pronounced like that. It doesn't really matter. If you go to Latin-speaking groups such as this school in Rome called the Academia Vivarium, where they only speak Latin all day, some people speak it in modern Italian-sounding Latin. Others speak it in classical Latin. You could say, "Can I speak English?" It would be "licet me Anglicae loqui," or you might have say "licet." It wouldn't matter to me. I would understand it, and that is a pronunciation, the ch of the c, that wasn't used until perhaps the 8th or 9th century in Italy. So Latin has a very long history. When you say we're going to speak Latin, or Greek, where in the 1500 years of spoken Latin are we going to say we're going to place our pronunciation? Where in the vast geographical span of Latin speakers over the course of those centuries are we going to speak? Because, it was spoken differently in Germany. The Latin Empire, the Roman Empire spread across, the Near East, the Far East, the Western Isles. They all spoke Latin, but they didn't speak it sounding the same. So why should it matter to us that it sounds exactly like this or that? It doesn't matter. There's a basic grammar, there's a basic vocabulary. Even that can vary, but we can converse in the subject. And that can help us when we then go and read Virgil or Seneca or Petronius or Neo-Latin, of which there are millions of words written by Latin speakers or Latin writers since the 3rd, 4th century AD, all the way through the Renaissance and so on. So let's read those as well.
Well, so just talk to me about the pedagogy a little bit. When I learned Latin, we used, it's probably been updated at this point, to the Cambridge Latin course. You know, we had a red book, a blue book, a green book. We would, each chapter we would memorize vocabulary words, and then we would read texts with them. I did it in, many years ago, and it continues to serve me to this day. Certainly for helping me learn French, Spanish, whatever. But talk to me about the pedagogy. You have to have some vocabulary. So do they like drill flashcards? Do they listen, or what?
Well, no,
how do you teach the active method to an 18-year-old
who's
never spoken Latin before?
Well, the best,
or they wouldn't come in if they've never spoken Latin.
No, they could. No, we have people. We teach them ab initio. Yeah. And
ab initio, what does that mean?
From the beginning,
yeah.
Ab initio.
Yeah.
Literally from the beginning. Yeah. We have ab initio learners of both Latin and Greek at Oxford, and I happen to have in my college 2 teachers who speak both Latin and Greek fluently. One is Bulgarian, one is from Mexico, and they both studied at the Academy of Vivarium in Rome, and they are both wonderful speakers of these languages. Yeah. So they will teach the languages from scratch. And how do you begin? You might begin by saying salve, as you did, or salvete. So there's a difference between those 2 words. One is singular, you say it to a singular person, salve, or you say it to a lot of people, salvete. So you say salve, singularis est. So they immediately get something grammatical. What does that mean? Salve is singular. Ad unum hominem, salve dico. To one person, I say salve. Ad multos homines, salvete dico. To a lot of people, I say salvete, which is the plural form. So immediately they're getting grammar, they're getting a few words, they're hearing someone use Latin. It doesn't really matter where you start. You begin and gradually, and of course they can take notes and go away, and they can be expected to respond.
But do they have a textbook or something?
There is a textbook, and it's a really great one. It's called Familia Romana by a man called Hans Urberg.
Written, obviously, in English.
The whole thing is written in Latin.
But they don't know Latin at the beginning.
Yes. They don't know Latin. You open this, they know English.
Yes.
And it says, Roma, the first sentence, I think, goes, Roma in Italia est.
Sure, you could work it out.
And you read that, and it has notes going down the side, and it has a map of Rome and Italy, and it's sort of Italia in Europa est. And immediately you're seeing that the verb est goes at the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
It puts the lines over the vowels to show in Italia. That is how you say in Italy. So Italy is Italia, but in Italia with a long A is the ablative, and then it will tell you ablativus est. So you're learning your grammar as you go along. So it's a brilliant book in that respect, and it builds it up, and there's a lot of repetition.
I remember the endings.
Yeah, you remember your only... But, once you get some of that under your belt, it starts to become, after a couple of months, it starts to become natural.
Yeah, I never learned Spanish with the book. That's true. It's just around it.
So there's a lot to be said for the active method. I mean, it's proved its worth in Oxford in 5 years. Our students learning by the active method have done extremely well.
Mm.
And they love it. And if you had said to me in when was it? When I went to Oxford, I came up in 1979. If you'd said, okay, you can go to Merton and you will learn Latin and do a lot of texts in 4 years, or you can go to Jesus, and there they are doing active Latin. You'll come out speaking the language, as well as doing all those texts, because you've got to for the exam.
Mm.
I would have said, of course I want to speak the language. Why would I not? In addition to actually reading Virgil and Horace and Homer and, every other author that I read at the time. So that is what we're offering now.
I might have to consider another degree at Jesus, I suppose.
Yeah, you might just. A lot of people say, "Well, I'd love to come and do that." It's hard work.
It is hard work, and maybe I'm too old.
Well, I mean, Jesus tends not to take older pupils, but we have spread this method to Harris Manchester College, which does.
Yeah.
And Harris Manchester, if you go there, you will come to Jesus to learn Latin with my lot.
You know what would be really funny, but also kind of crazy, if someone did like a rap in Latin and released some Latin rap music.
Oh, some people are doing that, I can assure you. There are raps on YouTube in Latin. And in fact, then there was a big football game a few years ago. Someone produced a really good song in Latin.
Right.
It was actually that football song that David Baddiel puts out, Football's Coming Home.
Right.
And it's terribly good. I mean, a footballer is pedilusor, someone who plays with his foot. So he talked about the pedilusores, the footballers, and so on. And it was sung, and people are doing that sort of gimmick all the time, and it sort of brings Latin and Greek back into popular culture. As do memes, as do some of these films where you have Latin spoken.
Yeah, or it's not a film; it's a mass at Oxford.
Yeah.
I've heard people go quite long on their recitations.
Yeah.
They're just from...
So you can do all of that. I mean, Harvard apparently still has that, I forget what it's called, a valedictory or something, where a top student gives a speech.
Valedictorian. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
So that there's one circulating on YouTube. I've seen it recently.
Never went to Harvard. Not yet. Not yet.
With the next officer. I don't think you have to do it, but I think you can.
No, you have to be elected valedictorian.
Right. So he's elected valedictorian, and he did it. There's one guy who's on YouTube doing it, a whole speech in Latin, really impressively.
Maybe when I'm like 60, 65, I'll go to Harvard as an undergraduate in a different subject. I don't know if they've let me. I do remember from Latin the phrase "faci non flaccio."
Flocky non faccio.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Flocky?
Flocky non faccio.
Flocky non faccio.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give a hoot.
I don't give a hoot. I mean, literally a straw, and flocus, meaning a straw, in the genitive is called the genitive of value. So the value of a straw, I do not make, literally, non faccio.
Flocky non faccio.
Exactly.
Right, maybe.
And if you're Italian, you say flocci non faccio. And I understand it just as well. I don't care how you pronounce it.
As long as you pronounce it.
As long as you say it.
Okay, Armand, can we go for a bit longer? I want to be respectful of your time. Okay. I want to talk about some concepts from ancient Greece briefly. I know it's perhaps not fair or reasonable to expect sound bites on these things, which could merit entire libraries. But the first is, on the concept of eudaimonia. Tell us about
this. I mean, this is, the central goal, according to some of the great philosophers of the ancient world. Happiness, as we would put it. Happiness is the goal. What do you want as a human being? So an ethical philosopher would say, well, you want to be eudaimon. You want to have eudaimonia. Now, it doesn't quite mean...
Eudaimon state, or how would you say it? You want to have eudaimo, it's a noun.
Eudaimonia is the noun. To be eudaimon is to be, well, happy.
It's a predicate nominative. It's an adjective.
Yeah, but it's an adjective, eudaimon, and it means...
Well, I am, it would function as a predicate nominative, right?
I am eudaimon.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but it doesn't mean happy in our sense. For us, happiness is a kind of feeling. For them, eudaimon, which literally means of good spirit, of good God, daimon in that sense is an external spirit, would mean blessed or to have a good life. So it's almost an objective way of being happy. It's not whether you feel it, it's whether you're a lucky person. So we might say happiness and luck are very closely associated. The sort of life that you are allotted by luck is what makes you a happy person. And you might say, yeah, well, I've got, riches and family and everything, but I'm still not happy. Now, that doesn't work. If you're eudaimon, you've got all those things, therefore you have eudaimonia, you see. You may not...
But it's not material.
It need not be material. That was one of the big debates. So what makes a person eudaimon? Is it material goods? Now, of course, the philosophers are going to say no, because they can disappear in an instant, and they're not what makes your soul flourish. And, of course, some people translate eudaimonia as flourishing. Well, what is it? So Aristotle writes a whole treatise called the Nicomachean Ethics about eudaimonia, and he ends up with a rather strange view that it must mean...
What does Nicomachean mean?
Oh, it's just named after his son Nicomachus, who presumably put together the lecture notes of his father Aristotle, and because there's another ethics book called the Eudemian Ethics, so that was put together by Eudemos. But the Nicomachean Ethics is the big one, in which Aristotle starts off with this question of what is eudaimonia, and ends up with this, as I say, rather strange conclusion that it is the contemplation of the eternal truths of mathematics. The idea that basically you're happy if you're contemplating the truth. Well, what is the truth? The most truthful thing you can get is mathematical truth. So if you're contemplating those truths, then you're happy. Well, that doesn't sound right to us. A flourishing life can't consist simply of contemplation. It's a kind of reductio ad absurdum, and people don't pay a lot of attention to that conclusion of Aristotle. But the argument itself...
What conclusion?
That's what we want. That's what we have to do.
Should just contemplate...
Yeah, well, not that we, but that is what the gods are doing, contemplating truth. In the course of that, he talks about the golden mean, and that takes up several books in which he says, what is it that makes a human being good and happy? And it's not straying into excess. So you're not going to be over generous, but you're not going to be mean. To be a good person, you have to be in the middle. The problem with that is that it's impossible to define what the middle is. What is it? Is it over generous to give a poor man £10,000? Even some people might say, well, that's ridiculous. Well, it may not be that at all. If you're very wealthy, £10,000 might be a good thing to give. So the idea that there is a mean doesn't really help you. A medium space doesn't really help you decide exactly how you're going to be good by following the golden mean. So that's not a satisfactory element in his ethical theory. But yeah, the idea of how are we to essentially be happy as human beings, I mean, the ancient Greek philosophers tried to pin this down to what sort of a thing is a human being. And Plato says, well, of course, what a human being above all is a thinking, rational creature. And so our true goal must be to follow the rational part of our self, because we've got other parts, and he defines us as tripartite. We have nous, mind or reason, which we should take as our leading principle. We have appetite, which draws us into wanting things which may or may not be good for us. And we have spirit, which makes us do things that, fight, which is essentially something that gives us strength and force of character. And we need to put those two, the spirit and appetite, into some sort of order and have reason lead. And if we get this balance between reason, appetite, and spirit, then we are in a good place. So he saw us as trying to achieve a balance. And this is what he says then, we're fulfilling our function as human beings if we do that in the right order. If one overbalances, let's say we go for the appetitive, the one that makes us want to eat too much or to have too much sex or whatever, then we're out of balance. And that isn't going to make us happy.
What's the third? Reason, appetite?
Spirit. Thumos in Greek. Yeah. So you need the sort of spirit that would allow you to fight and to succeed. So it's not...
Reason, appetite, and spirit.
Yeah. So it's a triangle, but reason is...
And there's no formula for balancing these?
No, not really. This is the problem.
Do you think you're in a eudaimon state, Armand?
Do I think I'm eudaimon? Well, sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. How about that?
Is it so it can fluctuate?
Oh, I mean, of course it can fluctuate. Well, certainly if one thinks about it in a modern philosophical sense, the idea that someone is always...
It must fluctuate.
It must.
It's dynamic.
Yeah, it is dynamic. The idea that, you can just flourish all the time.
So you weren't before you came, and then you came and you spoke with me, and I lifted up your spirit,
Well, actually,
encouraged your intellectual appetite.
Do you know what? There's a modern philosopher of Chicago. I think he recently died. His name was Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh, Csikszentmihalyi, he's a flow state guy.
Yeah, and he talks about
Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah.
Csikszentmihalyi, and I think he's got a point. You're happy when you're in the flow. So actually, yes, I am happy now because I'm flowing, I'm thinking, I'm conversing, I'm relating. When I play the cello, it's my instrument, I can just absolutely fly on the sounds. And, although I'm concentrating on making sure it's in tune and I'm getting it right, at the same time, there is a sense in which you can abandon yourself to the sheer pleasure of it as well. That's a sort of sense of flow. And so I think he's onto something with that. Maybe a lot of the time you're not particularly happy or unhappy. When you're in flow, you're feeling something greater than just your normal everyday feelings.
Mm.
And it's true when you're being creative. So one of my most exciting recent projects was working on the biography of Socrates, the philosopher.
I was going to ask.
You were going to ask about that. Well, it's so important for me because I just love this, because it was so clear as I got into it that this character who Socrates tells us in Plato's Symposium he had learned the one thing he knows, which is love, from, and calls her Diotima, which everyone assumes is a fiction. It became clearer and clearer that she is not a fiction, that the name means honored by Zeus. Zeus was Pericles. The person Pericles honored was Aspasia, this woman famously known for being an intellectual in her time, someone who had set up salons.
Not a prostitute.
Well, she was, of course, dismissed as you would in a patriarchal, misogynistic society. If there's a very powerful woman married to the most powerful man in the land, of course you're going to dismiss her as a prostitute, and they do. The comic poets do. Plato didn't. Xenophon didn't. They called her a respected teacher. So actually, why does everybody side with the comic poets? The people who write the reviews and the News of the World types. Yeah, they can call her what they like. As far as I'm concerned, Plato and Xenophon knew better. And this woman, Aspasia of Miletus, was clearly a brilliant intellectual and a teacher. And she was, of course, the power behind Pericles and honoured by Pericles, the leading citizen of Athens. And when Socrates says, I learned from Diotima, honoured by Zeus, Zeus was the nickname for Pericles, what I know about love, and indeed then goes on to say, this is what she taught me, and the way she taught me was Socrates' own dialectical method and method of definition, and these are the things that Socrates has contributed to philosophy, then you realise, actually she is the founder of Western philosophy, because she taught him the moves for which he became known. So that's very exciting. That has yet to flower into its full beauty, and I think it will do so with a film called Socrates in Love, which I have been working on.
Okay.
And which
But there's also the book.
The book Socrates in Love, which I wrote in 2019, which has not been refuted. I mean, all the proofs that I brought, which, as I say, excited me enormously when I realized it all fits together
that she's real.
Well, we knew she was a real person, Aspasia. We knew she was married to Socrates, to Pericles, sorry. We knew that she was an unusual intellectual in her time. But because she had been dismissed by comic playwrights as a prostitute, as a brothel keeper, as a madam, the best we could do was say she must have been a high-class prostitute or a courtesan, which is mad, because actually Pericles, leading citizen of Athens, was married to her for 16 years before he died, and she would have been, the leading lady in Athens, despite the fact that Athens was not inclined to think that women deserved to be educated and deserved to have ideas of their own. But Aspasia was there doing all those things. And it was accused of making Pericles go to war with Samos in 440, of making him go to war with the Peloponnesians in 431. So she was clearly very powerful and very influential. And then we learn that she was very eloquent and taught Pericles how to speak, and he was a great speaker. And that she was respected by Socrates. And indeed, we have some evidence that she and Socrates were lovers before she became Pericles' wife. And all of that, I think, we can take seriously and draw a picture of an extraordinary young woman who comes from across the sea. So she's of Athenian genealogy. I think we now know that. And she came from Miletus in Asia Minor across the Aegean to Athens, probably when she was around 20, same age as Socrates. They would have known each other for a few years. She would have taught him what she teaches him, according to Plato in Symposium. And then she went off with Pericles and became Pericles' wife. He was twice her age. But he was terribly important and fell in love with her. And that was then how it worked out. Socrates went off and became a philosopher.
So there was no Socrates-Aspasia relationship?
I think there was.
Oh, there was.
Because we're told that by a pupil of Aristotle called Clearchus, who generally we consider as a very authoritative source. And he says before...
so she was his teacher and his
she was...
his what? A girlfriend,
so
not the right word.
She was Socrates' lover.
Right.
I think, because that's what we're told. Before she was with Pericles, she was with Socrates.
As a student, as a 20...
It doesn't say. We're just told that that is the phrase that we get from Clearchus. And was with in Greek could mean she just associated with him or she was his lover.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it's the same word used of what she was later with Pericles. She was his lover, she was his wife, and she was the mother of his child. So whatever she was with Socrates before that, she was at least more than just someone he knew. She was more than an acquaintance, I think. Anyway, so that's what the film is going to show. The 22-year-old Socrates falling in love with this newcomer.
Amazing. Where is this in the development?
Well, the screenplay has been written. It is now
by you,
by me, and by a brilliant young screenwriter in America called Chad Arl, who just got in touch with me back in 2020 and saying, "I love your book. I want to write a screenplay." So we worked on it together.
Awesome.
And it's a really funny. It's you think of Shakespeare in Love, that wonderful Tom Stoppard screenplay. It's kind of like that because it's about this strange young man, Socrates, who falls in love with this strange woman, also his age, 20-ish. And then Socrates goes off to fight because he was famous as a fighter. Hoplites were heavy armed infantry, and he fought in Athens battles all his life. And he goes off to fight, and when he returns, she's with Pericles.
No.
And she
Gatsby comes back.
And she has to let him down gently, and she gives him the doctrine of love that we get in Plato's Symposium that Diotima gives Socrates, which is love begins with physical attraction, but you go up the ladder of love, and one of the steps on that ladder is patriotic love. So now I'm with the leading citizen. You can't blame me. I'm with Pericles. But it goes up further than that. Love is, something that is transcendent. And she gives him the philosophy of love in this film, and he becomes a philosopher because he's been dumped by Aspasia. I mean, that's obviously the fictional thing, but I think there's something in it, even historically.
What was this swimming book you wrote back in 96? You and Stephen Shaw.
So
hard to find, but I tracked it down.
I mean, it's funny because that was the first book I wrote, and I wrote it while I was doing my doctorate at UCL. I'd come out of business, and I'd met my wife, and I had gone abroad on various holidays, and I was a determined aquaphobe. Because at school, when I was young, I'd been thrown into, nasty chlorinated pools, and then freezing cold outdoor ones, and I'd never learned to swim.
Right.
I mean, I could sort of, do this and just about keep my head above water, but I felt afraid of water.
Did you, go to the beach ever, or you didn't get in the water?
I stayed away from the beach. And this is the first holiday I went with my wife. We went to Sicily, and I went to all the temples, and I was showing her with great glee the wonderful glories. And she said, I want a pool. I want the beach. And I was saying, nah, not interested in that. Yeah. So eventually she realized the reason I wasn't interested is because I couldn't swim.
Yeah.
So she said, well, go and have swimming lessons. And I went eventually to a swimming teacher called Stephen Shaw, who taught the Alexander technique, which I'd done for years.
Which is what?
Which is about posture. So exactly the opposite of what I'm doing now, which is collapsing into myself. It's about extending your spine.
But it's about swimming, or it's about walking, or?
No, it's about everyday life, and it started with Matthias Alexander, who was an actor.
It's like sort of pseudoscience, or what?
No.
Like,
no, he was an actor.
You stand with the posture.
No, I'll
feel
explain.
more confident.
What Alexander found was that when he was acting, his voice seized up.
Right.
And he thought, well, this is anxiety, but there's a physical cause to that. And he studied himself using three-way mirrors and things. He realized that what happens when he's anxious is he pulls his head back slightly, almost imperceptibly.
Which messes with his vocal cords.
Not only that, it compresses the spine.
Yeah.
That in turn means it affects your rib cage, which of course means you can't breathe fully, and it makes your voice go like that. And so he said, well, why don't we just reverse it and learn to straighten out the spine by nodding forward a bit? And he said upwards and outwards was his idea. You imagine your spine stretching upwards and outwards. And that way you then open up your breathing mechanism and everything starts to work again. So it's kind of reversing this bad habit we get into of slumping and pushing ourselves down. And of course, that's exactly what happens. It's a mechanical response to the incapacity that you bring upon yourself when you're nervous. And so musicians in my day, when I was at the music college, we were all told to do Alexander technique because you're playing the cello and you're a bit nervous because you're in front of an audience. You'll do that, and then everything will start to seize up. And so you need to do the opposite, so we all did it. So when I went, 10 years later to swimming lessons with someone who taught that technique, I immediately thought there's a fantastic parallel here between learning to swim properly and the Alexander technique, because the Alexander is about freeing yourself up from fears physically. And when you get into cold water, the first thing you do, if you're not used to it, is you seize up. And how are you going to breathe properly and swim and float and do all those things you need to do? And there were various principles of Alexander technique, which is one is don't end gain, don't try to reach the end, just live in the moment. And that's important when you're learning to swim, just enjoy the water. Another might be, the importance of breathing. Of course, that's as important for swimming, it's important for the Alexander technique. Bodily orientation, which is where it all begins, crucial. If you are extended, your spine's extended, you're thinking outwards like that, you can float easily. Otherwise, you kind of will go down. So I created chapters with Stephen Shaw in which we described this swimming technique as something like the Alexander technique in the water. And he went on and made a huge commercial empire as a swimming instructor, which he runs, the Shaw method, as he called it. And
how did you find this guy exactly?
Well, it was literally a little card that he had put up in the gym saying swimming teaching.
And you're post PhD, and you wanted
it was during my PhD, and I was going to our local gym, and I saw one card which said Stephen Shaw swimming teacher, and next to it Stephen Shaw Alexander technique teacher, and I thought, hey, why isn't he both? Went to him. I learned to swim within a month with him for all sorts of simple reasons. He taught me in a warm pool, so I didn't seize up. The pool was only up to my chest, so I didn't feel that I was drowning. He taught me just to sort of go across the width with my face in the water, thinking about the orientation of my body, so I wasn't thinking about swallowing water. And so on, bit by bit. I mean, within a week, I started to be confident floating head face in the water, which is, once you've done that, you can start to bring in movements and all that sort of stuff. But it taught me in very quickly. I then became a swimming instructor myself for a few months. So that was the reason for the book. But people came up to me, I remember at the time, saying, "Do you know someone with your name has written a book on swimming?" And I thought, yeah, well, it's quite a common name, really.
Okay, Armand, we like to
We
end
need to wind up.
yeah, we like to end these interviews by asking guests about their favorite book and their favorite film.
Okay. Well, is it really possible? It's like saying, what's your favorite musician? If you're a musician, is it Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Mozart, Schubert? I mean, how can you choose between all these geniuses? Favorite book? I mean, is it a fiction? Is it a non-fiction book? It's up to me to choose. Oh,
I'll give one of each if you want.
One of each. Oh, well, I mean, it's kind of. I wish I'd thought about this before. Now that you mention it. Well, what's your favorite film? Well, okay, let me pick on Shakespeare and I mean, not necessarily my all-time favorite film. I mean, there's a fantastic load of Netflix films which I think are absolutely brilliant. But Shakespeare in Love, which was 1998, it did have a huge effect on me because it was such a fun film. It was so brilliantly screenplayed by Stoppard, and it has led to my attempt to create a film for Socrates in Love, which is to some extent modelled on it. So I'll give that one to you. Well, I mean, non-fiction. Okay, let's think of a classics book. A book that I adored when I was at school and still think is wonderful is a book by a former Regius Professor of Greek called E.R. Dodds. And he wrote a book called The Greeks and the Irrational, which was just wonderfully scholarly but beautifully written as well, about how the assumption that everything that was done by the Greeks was very rational and ordered. They were mathematicians. They had beautiful, harmonious sculpture. They produced temples like the Parthenon in the Fibonacci ratio. That assumption about Greek culture and Greek characteristics, he said, we shouldn't assume that that's all there was. There was this irrational side. There was the madness and inspiration of religious devotion, of divine and fated chaos. And so he writes a whole book about the irrational element in Greek culture that goes all the way through from the classical period through to late antiquity. And there was just something about that made me, when I wrote my book called The Greeks and the New, kind of based on the Greeks and the Greeks and the Irrational, same sort of title. And I was saying something similarly. You all think the Greeks didn't like novelty, but here's a book telling you that they were just as keen on novelty as they were on tradition. So I choose that as my non-fiction book. I mean, for fiction, almost impossible to say, really. I just love so much of the 19th century novels, the load of brilliant 20th century novels. I mean, I've just read quite a fun novel called Glorious Exploits. I wouldn't say it's my favorite book, but it's about an episode in 5th century Greece when the Athenians were invading Sicily. They lost this terrible campaign. Thousands of them were caught in the quarries in Syracuse and starved to death. But those who could sing the latest tragedies of Euripides were saved because the Sicilians, their captors, were mad on music and they wanted to know what the latest drama in Athens was. And so the prisoners were allowed out and they were given food and water. So the premise of this book by a young first-time author called Ferdia Lennon is that a play is being put on and two Sicilians are going down to the quarries and rescuing some Athenians so they can put on a play by Euripides. But in the end, of course, all the Athenians die horrible deaths. So there is tragedy there. But I think he's done quite a good job.
Plague or war or what?
Well, no, they were literally put in these quarries and starved to death by the Sicilian captors.
Yeah.
And also, it was a horrible death because it would have been boiling hot during the day. There was no shade and freezing cold at night. Ugh, poor things.
Poor things.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Thank you so much.